Mr. Sjur Bergan, Council of Europe, Head of Education Department, will now address the gathering.
Rettore Magnifico, ministers, rectors, students, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. Turning 20 is worth celebrating. And when we celebrate, we tend to look back. There's good reason to celebrate, because nobody present here in Bologna in those days in June 1999 had probably quite imagined exactly what the Bologna Declaration would evolve into. A higher education area that is truly European, with 48 members. A framework that became the reference for higher education in Europe, and from which no country felt it could afford to stay aloof. Or cooperation between different actors across national borders, public authorities, institutions, student staff, international organizations working together. Comprehensive structural reforms. A cooperation where countries undertake commitments and then report on whether the commitments have been fulfilled. So there is much to celebrate. Higher education in Europe would not have been the same without the Bologna process. And even if the implementation of our commitments is uneven, even if no member country can claim to be driving on bright green traffic lights alone, the European higher education area has made it easier for students to move across borders, to have fair recognition of their qualifications so that they do not need to leave parts of their intellectual luggage behind at the higher education equivalent of customs stations, because recognition procedures are narrow-minded or protectionist or both. And it has made it easier to know whether any given study program that may look interesting has been quality assured. These alone are no small achievements. But we're only turning 20. We should have many more reasons to look ahead than to look back. What can we do in the next 20 or 40 years that we have not done so far or have not done well enough? I believe our higher education systems and structures are supremely important. And they're important not because they look nice, but because they serve a purpose. Ensuring that more people leave higher education with a qualification and fewer drop out without one is important. But traveling faster and more smoothly, enjoyable as it may be, makes sense only if we travel towards something worthwhile. If we're going in the wrong direction, we might as well travel slowly. So structures are important, but education is much more than structures. Education has several purposes. Preparation for the labor market, for sure, but also preparation for life as active citizens in democratic societies, personal development, and the development and maintenance of a broad and advanced knowledge base. These four purposes, as defined by the Council of Europe, are equally important, and they're not contradictory. Many of the competencies that make us attractive on the labor market also prepare us for a role as active participants in democratic societies, and they further our personal development. At the Council of Europe, we have focused our work in particular on preparation for democracy. And part of the reason for that is to be found in the same events that made it possible to establish a truly European higher education area, namely the extensive political changes in Europe in what historians may come to call the long 1990s. The Berlin Wall fell, and we applauded. Constitutions were changed, and we not only applauded, but often advised. Free elections were held, and we rejoiced, and we thought we had democracy. And then we discovered things aren't quite that simple. Institutions, elections, and laws cannot be democratic unless they function in societies imbued by democratic culture, which we take to mean the set of attitudes and behaviors that accepts that conflicts should be resolved peacefully, that recognizes that your view may legitimately be different from mine, and that sees diversity as an opportunity, not as a threat. This is what we have come to call a culture of democracy, and for which we have developed a reference framework that outlined 20 competencies centered around values, attitudes, skills, and knowledge and critical understanding. A culture of democracy cannot be developed without education. And education cannot help develop a culture of democracy unless the fundamental values of the European higher education area are respected and promoted. Academic freedom, institutional autonomy, and the participation of students and staff in higher education governance. Just last week, the Council of Europe hosted a global forum on academic freedom, institutional autonomy, and the future of democracy, and the declaration it adopted is being made available online. There is no more appropriate place than Bologna to remind ourselves of the fundamental values of higher education. Bologna is the city that gave us the Magna Carta Universitatum, and Bologna is the city that gave us, well, the Bologna Declaration and the Bologna process. As we look back at the very real achievements of the European higher education area over the past 2 decades, let us also look forward to what should guide us during the next few years and decades. How can we build on the structural reforms and the other achievements of Bologna's childhood and youth to do what Bologna should do as an adult? Develop higher education in Europe to meet the challenges we face as societies. How can we help develop societies that are sustainable environmentally and socially, politically and financially, intellectually and practically? How can we, as staff, students, higher education institutions, and public authorities, work together, not only to train, but to educate? We are probably better at training highly qualified subject specialists than ever before. But are we good enough at educating intellectuals, by which I mean those who can take their subject-specific competences, put them into a broader context, ask the critical questions, and find the answers to those questions? If we are not, then that is perhaps the biggest challenge of the European higher education area. How can we develop both the overarching framework of qualifications of the European higher education area and the Council of Europe's reference framework for democratic culture? How can the Bologna process help us make education what the American journalist Ambrose Bierce in his Devil's Dictionary thought it should be? That which reveals to the wise and hides from the foolish their lack of understanding. How can the European higher education area help answer the question the Chilean sociologist Eugenio Tironi feels that we need to answer before we can decide what kind of education we need, namely, what kind of societies do we want? With that, we should have our agenda set not only for this anniversary conference, but for the many Bologna anniversaries we hope are still to come. No city is better placed than Bologna, both to celebrate what higher education has achieved and look ahead to what higher education still needs to do. Grazie mille, tanti auguri, dottore Magnifico.